Perhaps nothing says summertime like the iconic jingle of an ice cream truck. And there's no more quintessential childhood experience than hearing that familiar tune, quickly searching for all the money you have and running to catch up with the other kids before it drives away. But how did this ice cream cooler on wheels come to be?
Well, it all started when ice cream, which had been around for centuries, came to the United States.
Ice cream wasn't sold on the streets until the 19th century, when street vendors selling frozen treats out of ice cream carts became a standard occupation for immigrants arriving in the US in the early 1800s. Early ice cream treats had one major problem though. There was no easy way to hold them. Obviously, since ice cream melted, you couldn't hold the product with your bare hands without eating up a sticky mess. Disposable cups had not been invented yet either, so vendors, they had to get creative. Early street ice cream included Hokey Pokey, a Neapolitan striped treat cut into small pieces and wrapped in paper. And then we had Penny Licks, a small portion of ice cream served in a glass cup that would then be returned to the vendor and reused again and again all day. Anyhow, ice cream sandwiches were also a big hit with customers that had very little extra money to spare, but I think you guys see where I'm going with this. Ice cream selling wasn't the most hygienic of practices. For example, that glass cup I mentioned a moment ago, well, the vendor would simply rinse it in a pan of water. And as you can imagine, rinsing isn't exactly enough for something that multiple people are putting their mouths on in the same day. Not to mention, no one really knows how often the actual water was changed. But what was even more concerning is that milk as a whole wasn't pasteurized until the late 1800s, meaning every time someone consumed a dairy product, such as ice cream, it carried the risk of deadly disease such as scarlet fever, diphtheria, and bovine tuberculosis.
Ice cream poisonings, as they were known, were common during this time and even reported by the news.
However, public health officials often overlooked the source of the problem in unsafe dairy and instead focused their concern on the artificial flavoring in ice cream. Thankfully, people didn't give up on the frozen treat before pasteurization became the norm, which didn't take too long. By the turn of the century, people could enjoy their favorite dessert without the threat of disease. From here, ice cream continued to grow in popularity in the early 1900s, especially with the introduction of the ice cream cone at the 1904 World's Fair. Now, people could easily take their treat with them and eat it safely too. Then, by the 1920s, Prohibition was in full swing, and the manufacturing and sale of alcoholic beverages was completely illegal. So it's thought that with booze out of the picture, many temptation-driven Americans turned to things like ice cream as another way to indulge themselves. Ice cream consumption rose as much as 40% during the 1920s, causing many ice cream parlors to pop up everywhere.
This was around the same moment that unprecedented advancements in refrigeration allowed new electric coolers to fully replace ice deliveries, and importantly, their portability allowed them to be placed inside of automobiles for the very first time.
One ice cream parlor owner in Youngstown, Ohio, named Harry Burt, capitalized off this ice cream boom in the 1920s by inventing the classic ice cream on a stick. You know what I'm talking about here. It's the type encased in a shell of frozen chocolate known as the Good Humor Bar. This invention came about when Burt created a chocolate coating that was compatible with ice cream. His daughter Ruth was the first to try it, and although she loved the taste, she thought it was too messy to eat. That's when his son, Harry Jr., proposed freezing sticks they had used for their previous invention, Jolly Boy Suckers, into the ice cream to use as a handle. This solution worked great and offered another way for ice cream to be eaten on the go. Burt named this new creation the Good Humor Bar, based on the belief that a person's humor or outlook on life was connected to the humor of the palate or sense of taste. Accordingly, the company they were sold from took on the same name. At the time, Burt was already delivering ice cream to homes by truck, but since his new invention didn't need a bowl or cone, he could sell them directly to customers on the street. To this end, he bought a fleet of 12 refrigerated trucks and began selling his ice cream bars all over the city. It wasn't long before the company took off.
And critically, thanks to smart marketing, Good Humor was able to set itself apart from the sickness-inducing ice cream of the past.
Since their creation, Good Humor bars were sold from gleaming white trucks by clean-shaven men in similarly white uniforms, not dissimilar to those worn by hospital orderlies. This was meant to invoke ideas of cleanliness and sanitation, which the company took very seriously.
They even had a training manual that instructed drivers to get enough sleep, eat well, and always have a neat haircut.
When America entered the Great Depression, ice cream remained on top, as it was one of the few indulgences people were still willing to shell out for. So it's no surprise that by the mid-1930s, Good Humor trucks could be found throughout most of the country. The company was even able to sell 14 million Good Humor bars in just 2 cities, New York and Chicago. And astonishingly, that record was hit in 1932 alone. During this time, Good Humor drivers were paid approximately $100 a week, or about $2,200 a week when adjusted for inflation. Good Humor's success and popularity allowed them to thrive, even in the midst of the Great Depression. By the 1950s, Good Humor boasted a fleet of over 2,000 ice cream trucks, but competition was on the horizon. You see, during World War II, dairy rationing led to a decrease in ice cream availability, but when it ended, Americans annually were consuming more than 20 quarts of ice cream per person, or 5 gallons. Many took advantage of this ice cream boom and started their own ice cream truck businesses. One of these was Mr. Softy, started by the Conway brothers in Philadelphia. In 1956, William and James Conway worked for an ice cream machine manufacturer in Philadelphia, but began to get more and more requests for machines that could fit in trucks. They filled the orders, but these jury-rigged machines could only last so long before you began to run into problems. Their customers were just taking the machines and bolting them into the trucks, but they required shock absorbers and some way to keep the machines themselves cool. The Conways realized that the trucks needed a machine that was specially designed for them, but their employer didn't see the vision and didn't allow them to spend the time or resources necessary to produce them. So in a risky move, the brothers decided to quit and create a better ice cream truck company on their own. The result was a state-of-the-art machine that produced perfectly smooth ice cream from the back of a moving truck. Mr. Softy was born. The Conways gradually added trucks to their fleet, but soon realized it was more profitable to sell their trucks as franchises than run them all themselves. And so it was. From 1955 to 1970, Mr. Softy franchising grew by 3,600%. Mr. Softy was able to differentiate from Good Humor by selling soft service ice cream, sundaes, and milkshakes instead of just ice cream bars. During this time, Good Humor was still going strong with enough popularity to get their own movie called The Good Humor Man in 1950. By the 60s, the brand had more than 85 different ice cream treats, but unfortunately, the demise of their trucking operation was just around the corner. You see, in 1975, New York City charged the company with hundreds of counts of falsifying food safety records in order to hide evidence of bacteria in its products. In fact, it's believed that around 10% of all Good Humor ice cream sold between 1972 and 1975 was tainted. After all the effort to build their brand around cleanliness, Good Humor still ended up with a public reputation for tainted and contaminated ice cream. Combined with declining sales, increased competition, and the 1970s fuel crisis, resulted in Good Humor pulling out of the ice cream truck business to focus exclusively on their grocery stores.
All the vehicles in their fleet were sold in 1976 for between $1,000 and $3,000 per truck.
Many of these trucks were sold to competition, who at the time only carried regular ice cream since the majority of people couldn't afford a freezer at home. But as freezers became more affordable, ice cream trucks began to sell novelty items like popsicles and ice cream sandwiches. This was aided by other Good Humor classics like the Candy Crunch, Chocolate Eclair, Strawberry Shortcake, and Toasted Almond Ice Cream Bars, which were all relaunched in 1992. Other top sellers that are still popular today include rocket-shaped bomb pops, push-ups, and vanilla cones dipped in chocolate and covered with peanuts.
So what about that famous ice cream truck music? How did it come to be?
Well, when Harry Burt purchased his first fleet, he outfitted them with sleigh bells from his son's sled to announce the arrival of his trucks when they entered a neighborhood. The bells were eventually dropped in favor of pre-recorded music, thanks to a Good Humor franchisee in Los Angeles. Eventually, industry tests were run that found ice cream trucks equipped with music boxes sold almost twice the amount of ice cream as the trucks with bells, not even taking into consideration the trucks with no music at all. So it doesn't take a genius to tell you that adding music was definitely the right choice. Mr. Softy's tune was based off the melody from Arthur Pryor's The Whistler and His Dog. In 1960, a Philadelphia ad executive by the name of Les Wass gave the song lyrics and titled his version Jingle and Chimes. But that's not the end of the story, as a more familiar tune came about in 1973 when electrical engineer Bob Nichols watched the movie The Sting, and Scott Joplin's The Entertainer caught his ear. He thought the classic ragtime tune would be a perfect ice cream truck jingle, so Nichols, who had previously founded Nichols Electronics, a company that supplied music boxes to the vast majority of the country's ice cream trucks, designed music boxes with the song pre-installed on them. So after he implemented this change, The Entertainer was played on Nicholas's music boxes across the nation.
But the history of ice cream truck music goes back further than the creation of the ice cream truck itself.
But there were trucks that played other songs, and with this in mind, the history goes back a bit further and becomes a bit uncomfortable. You see, by far the most popular tune is the folk song Turkey in the Straw, which is itself based on an even older British song, The Old Rose Tree. Turkey in the Straw was brought to America in the 1820s by Scottish and Irish immigrants who settled along the Appalachian Trail and added lyrics that fit their new lifestyle. In fact, Turkey in the Straw was originally popularized by fiddle players before it was picked up by minstrel shows that depicted the extremely controversial use of blackface. In this context, the melody was used in conjunction with racist lyrics. The lyrics are a little too intense for YouTube, so you'll have to read between the lines a bit, but one was titled Zip, followed by the racial slur for black people beginning with the letter C. So the title was Zip C-Word. Anyhow, it was written by minstrel performer George Washington Dixon in the 1930s and featured a blackface character of the same name who was the city slicker counterpart to the infamous blackface character Jim Crow. But this character was a free black man trying to fit in with white high society by dressing nicely and using big words. The song was a hit, and by the time of Andrew Jackson's administration, it was the most popular song in the country. In fact, many would argue that it was this character that would go on to become an archetype for the so-called black urbanite, and his interactions with Jim Crow on stage would inspire the successful Amos and Andy act decades later. The lyrics of this minstrel song would also go on to inspire Academy Award-winning Zippity Doo-Dah from the Disney movie Song of the South. Upon listening, you can hear the stark similarities in this chorus, which is yet another reason activists became concerned that childhood media was tainted by a blackface minstrel tune. Another song with this melody was called N-Word, Love a Watermelon, Ha Ha Ha, written in 1916 by actor Harry C. Browne, which might even constitute the most racist song title ever. Anyhow, he was inspired not only by the melody, but also by a collection of postcards that could be found almost everywhere. These trading cards featured racist depictions of black people and were the nation's most popular collectibles. And so Browne simply combined a popular stereotype of the day with a popular melody to create a song, which he recorded with Columbia Records in March of that year. Since the advent of ice cream parlors, popular minstrel songs like Turkey in the Straw were commonly played. Part of the reason for this is because in the 1890s, the Regina Company sold music boxes that were popular in ice cream parlors, and the Turkey in the Straw was one of the songs included. However, after World War II, with the popularity of the automobile and the urban sprawl that resulted, meant that ice cream parlors had to find a way to get their product to the customers, and ice cream trucks were the perfect solution. So when they set out, they also installed music boxes inside of their trucks for the same reason as Bert, to announce their presence to the neighborhood. And so as ice cream parlors basically rolled onto the street in the form of trucks, they brought the Turkey in the Straw with them, a popular song which was sure to attract many customers, especially children. But they also brought many other blackface minstrel songs like Cape Town Races, Oh Susanna, Jimmy Crack Corn, and Dixie. Now, somewhat surprisingly, the origin of these songs evaded scrutiny until the mid-2010s. But then things really came to a head in 2020 with the George Floyd incident, sparking national outrage and further examination of historic media, exposing complications throughout American culture and even in unexpected places, like the ice cream truck jingle. When the news broke, Good Humor took to Instagram in June to voice their shock and disappointment at the song's origins and announced that they were taking steps to, quote, fight racism, injustice, and inequality. Then, 1 month later, on August the 13th, Good Humor released a new ice cream truck jingle, updated for the modern era and produced with none other than RZA of the Wu-Tang Clan. The new song blended the iconic and recognizable tones of ice cream truck music with elements of jazz and hip-hop. As a final test, it was played on real ice cream truck speakers to ensure that the mix would sound good outside. The track was announced alongside an ice cream truck driver education program, emphasizing the original song's awful origins and why it needed to be replaced with RZA's new song, a song which apparently is available for free. What's more is that Nicholas Electronics, the music box company who had come to hold a monopoly over all ice cream truck music boxes, announced that they would replace Turkey in the Straw with RZA's new song permanently.
This development basically ensured that no one would ever hear Turkey in the Straw from an ice cream truck ever again.
When the story of the new jingle made its way across the internet, it was picked up by many news outlets, including CNN, Vice, Rolling Stone, Billboard, and NPR. Well, RZA's new ice cream song received a lot of attention. The question of whether it will succeed in attracting customers is another story. Mark Nichols, Bob Nichols' son, believes there are a few rules that are key to an ice cream truck song's success. They should be short and easy to remember, around 15 to 45 seconds long, not overly complex, and are typically rooted in nostalgia. Mark currently runs Nicholas Electronics alongside his wife Beth, so considering his family's legacy, he's most likely the best authority on whether or not the song will succeed. As for RZA's song, only time will tell.
But before wrapping up here, let's have a look at what happened to ice cream trucks during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, along with many other businesses, and especially restaurants, ice cream trucks were shut down as inessential business. But the downturn didn't last long. As there was a surge in unemployment, droves of people signed up to become drivers. In some cases, regulations were ignored. In other cases, loopholes were found. Anyhow, there was actually said to be a surge in sales during the pandemic. And the consensus is that ice cream trucks actually thrived. And that's good because they have a lot to look forward to. Ice cream trucks today are going through a bit of a change due to rising ice cream costs, inflated gas prices, and more vendor permits that decrease the profit of operating such a business. To top it all off, there's also a substantial frozen treat competition going on in the United States, and ice cream trucks aren't nearly as common nowadays as they once were. However, there are some exciting developments as ice cream vendors have taken advantage of modern technology, allowing parents to GPS track the neighborhood truck, whereas social media allows companies to announce their daily route. But you can also book ice cream trucks for events like catering, bar mitzvahs, or birthday parties, and this is said to make up a big chunk of most ice cream trucks' revenue. Mr. Softy continues to operate as an ice cream truck franchise. It's the largest franchisor of soft ice cream trucks in the US, with dealers in 18 states and a short-lived operation in China. So I don't think anyone can disagree that Mr. Softy helped revolutionize the ice cream truck landscape through its quality engineering, advertising, and franchising. Despite some bans, ice cream trucks remain an iconic American experience, regardless of your background. If you grew up with ice cream trucks, you probably have a fond memory of the service.
And we'll leave it there for today, but if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, and definitely don't miss our video about the history of Fun Dip by clicking right here. Until next time, I'm Ryan Socash for Eats History.